I'm Julie of Quilts and welcome back to the Quilts for Baby and Beyond sew along. Today we're going to focus on making a triangles pillow. There is a big triangles pillow option and a small triangles pillow option. So let's get started. If you're using solids or non-directional prints, the cutting for the triangle pillows is pretty straightforward. The directions for cutting for the small is on page 22 and for the big is on page 20. If you have a print that is directional, there are some things to take into consideration. I wanted to use the dinosaur print that I'm using in many of the quilts to make a few pillows. I didn't want dinosaurs to be standing on their heads or sideways. The best way to solve this is to make two coordinating pillows. In the one pillow, the dinosaurs are pointing up, and in the other pillow, the dinosaurs are pointing down. This way I'm not wasting any of my fabric. To do this, go ahead and double the fabric, cut twice as many pieces, place the triangles that point up in one pillow and the triangles that point down in another pillow. Then, your second fabric, if it's non-directional, you can go ahead and use two different fabrics or you can use the same in both. Here I chose two coordinating fabrics from the same collection, a pink and a yellow, and now I have two pillows that coordinate together very well for the nursery. For the pillows I'm going to make today, I've decided to use Daydreamer by Tula Pink, specifically these ombre prints, because it'll give me a variety of fabrics that'll add even more interest to a project with two colors. I've decided to cut the small triangles pillow out of the pink and purple. Those directions are on page 22. And the large triangles pillow out of the blue, green, yellow. And I'm going to use this white on white from Tula Pink's line work for the background of both of them. I've gone ahead and laid out my triangles for my big triangles pillow. Since I have a little bit of interest in my one print because it's ombre, I've divided it up so I don't have all of my yellows next to each other, all of my blues. If you're working with two fabrics like my original black and white, just go ahead and lay your pieces out. The assembly is pretty simple. And as I mentioned, this is a great project to start with if you've never done anything with 60-degree triangles. We're going to begin by piecing things together in pairs. I'm going to slide these down so I can show you what I mean. What we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of our blunt corner and our sharp point, and we're going to piece these with a scant 1/4 inch seam right here. A scant 1/4 inch seam is just one thread over from a standard 1/4 inch. What it allows you to do is make sure that the fabric that gets eaten in the seam allowance does not interfere with the size of the finished piece, so it is more accurate than a 1/4 inch. So we're going to take these two pieces, fold them right sides together, pin in place, and sew our scant 1/4 inch seam. We're going to do the same with this pair, the same with this pair, and then we're going to do our last pair, which is actually a whole triangle and a half triangle. And that edge up there works for the same blunt corner. So we'll place these two together. And these. And then I'll head over to my machine and chain piece these together. If you have something like mine and you want to make sure that you keep your layout consistent, taking a quick snapshot with your cell phone is a great way to make sure that when you bring it back to your design wall, you have your pieces in the correct place. If you are working with a small triangles pillow, assembly is just the same, and I'll go over that again at the sewing machine. I'm over at my machine and I'm set up with a scant 1/4 inch seam. If you've never worked with a scant 1/4 inch seam before, it's best to test yours first to make sure that everything is accurate. Directions on how to do that are included on page 10 in the basics section of the Quilts for Baby and Beyond book. Once you have that set up, it's time to go ahead and sew our triangle pairs. In this case, I want to sew them like this. When I have them together, if I don't pin, I may accidentally sew this side or this side. So I highly suggest pinning so that you know which of the three sides that you need to sew. You can do this over at your design wall before you head on over to your machine, or you can double check and you can pin when you get to your machine, as I'm doing right now. I'm placing the pins nice and far away so that I won't have to remove them while sewing. You never want to sew over a pin. And now that I have those pinned, I'm simply going to go ahead and sew my scant 1/4 inch seam, and I'll chain piece these. I don't need to backstitch to the beginning or the end because they're going to get enclosed by other seams. Move on to the next one. Go nice and slow. We are working with bias. As long as you don't push or pull too much, everything will go through nice and easy. Now if you're working on the small triangles pillow, very similar. The triangles are just themselves smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and arrange them in the same way. And in this case, I'm not going to pin. I'll show you what I do when I don't pin. When I don't pin, I tend to keep my pairs together over here so that I can see them, and I flip them at the last moment so that I'm sure that I'm not mixing them up. You can do whichever method is more comfortable for you. So like I said, pull it over, flip, and then I know I'm sewing it on the correct side. Now, if by chance you happen to sew them on the wrong side, not a problem. I'm going to show you what happens. At this point in our assembly, that's okay, because everything is actually rotational and it doesn't really make a big difference. And we can just rotate it around. It does mean your bias and your shade of green will be on different sides, but that's okay in the overall assembly of your pillow. So I'm going to go ahead and snip these off. And with these here that I did correctly, I have shade of green here and here, bias here and here. And with the one I did incorrectly, which really is not incorrect, still looks the same, ended up with the same unit. I just have sewn my 2 straight of green, and now I have all bias, but it'll be okay. I can just go ahead and do this when I'm sewing my row together. So I'm going to head over to my pressing station with the triangles that I've sewn so far, and I'm going to press these seams open. Now I'm at my pressing station. First step is I'm going to finger press these open. Simply going to just open them up, just lightly press them open. Now I highly suggest pressing your seams open for this project. You're going to have 6 points intersecting and in one place, and by pressing them open, things are going to lay much flatter than if you try and press them to the side. Additionally, this project does not have the ability for things to nest, so there really is no advantage to pressing them to one side. My heat resistant stiletto, super handy tool. It's got a silicone end to it that if I touch it to the iron will not burn, so I don't have to worry about getting my finger close to keep that open. I use my heat resistant stiletto. Now we want to make sure that we're pressing. Pressing is up and down with a gentle little wiggle, not ironing. Ironing, like we iron clothes, we use pressure and we push, and that could stretch our bias. That's not something that we want to do. So we just want to go up and down with the occasional little wiggle. And if I touch my stiletto here, a-okay. Can't burn my stiletto, can burn my finger. So now that I have those pressed, I'm going to set those aside and press my blue and green ones. Same process. Just open those up. Now it's time to go ahead and lay them back out in my project. So I now have these 3 pairs, and I need to sew my pair over here, which is 1/2 triangle with a white piece, and I have this piece over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew these 2 together, Going to sew these two together, and I'm going to sew my last pair. When it comes to arranging these together, I'm going to use the dog ear that was created when I sew these together as my alignment point. So I'm going to flip these right sides together, and this yellow piece that overhangs is going to perfectly line up on this green point, just like that. And then this is going to overhang. This is correct. If you want an additional point of reference, you can trim that sharp point off. I showed that during the cutting week. And we're going to sew our scant 1/4 inch seam along there. And then with this one, our sharp point of our half triangle is going to serve the same purpose. Going to line this up here. And again, this will overhang here. And sewing from this valley to this valley is my scant 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to head back on over to the sewing machine to sew these. I have those two pieces I just lined up at my pressing station, as well as my last pair. And my last pair is a half triangle along with a complete triangle. And that's going to look very similar to what we did at first, which is I'm just going to flip the half triangle onto the triangle, line up my blunt end, and line up my sharp end. Put that through. I'm chain piecing as it's a good way to not waste thread and to keep going and avoid getting thread nests and my thread getting tangled or my machine getting unthreaded. It can also be helpful at this point to use a stiletto. I have many different stilettos I keep handy by my machine. Stiletto enables you to hold the fabric with this instead of with your finger. Don't want to get your finger too close to the machine. Always want to make sure when you have a seam pressed open like this that you don't accidentally flip it like this when you are getting close to sewing over it. So in order to keep it nice down and flat, I'm going to use my stiletto. And sew nice and slow. And then now I have my third pair. Again, I'm going to line up that sharp point. And as I mentioned, if I wanted to, I can go ahead and trim that corner off. I'll show you what that looks like. You can do this with the Super Sidekick, with the Hexamore, with the Sidekick, or with the Mini Hexamore. I'm going to show you with the Mini Hexamore because that's what I have convenient right here over at my sewing area. So I'm just going to go ahead and line it up like this and trim. If you need to see how this is done with the Sidekick or Super Sidekick, you can go back to look at the cutting video. So now I know exactly where this and this are going to line up. So I'm going to flip this over and my blunt corner is going to be right there. And then my sharp ones are going to line up right there. And since this is the corner of my pillow, I'm going to do a little bit of a back stitch just to make sure it's extra secure. Again, grab my stiletto. I'm going to keep that nice and flat. And as I mentioned with chain piecing, since I'm working on two pillows, I'm going to take advantage of continuing to piece part of the other pillow so that I don't waste any thread. I now have my first row is in 3 pieces. I'm going to head over to the pressing station to press these and show you what it looks like. My first piece, that last piece that I did. Again, use my heat resistant stiletto. Make sure that I'm pressing up and down with a little wiggle. Don't want to stretch my bias. Okay, and that piece goes up there. And then my next piece is 2 of my triangle units together. Again, we're going to finger press that open. Grab my stiletto. And when I'm walking along a seam, I'm not pushing. I am lifting up and down as I walk along my seam. Give a little wiggle at the end there. And if you like steam, you can go ahead and use steam. I generally do. It gets a little loud while filming, so I don't have it on today. But I do like steam. It also helps to get everything nice and crisp and flat. Again, press that open. And so now I have my first row is in 3 pieces. So I just need to follow those same steps that I just did to go ahead and sew this seam and to sew this seam. So in this case, I am going to flip and pin right now to make sure that I don't get anything on the wrong piece or the wrong side when I get back over to my machine. And I will sew these as well as continue to chain piece my 3 other rows of my pillow. So pin there. And pin there. I'm going to repeat that over here, sharp point to sharp point, and then that triangle should overhang and line up with my seam allowance of this piece. There's lots of places to double check yourself, make sure you're aligned properly. Proper cutting and proper alignment will yield the best resulting pillow with accurate points. So as I mentioned, I'm just going to head over to the machine, sew these 2 seams, as well as continue to chain piece the rest of my pillow. I have my first row pieced, and I'm going to go ahead and press these final 2 seams open and continue putting the rest of my pillow together. Now that I have finished piecing each of my rows, it's time to go ahead and assemble my rows together. Now I could just simply take this one, place it on top of this one, right sides together, sew a scant 1/4 inch seam, and hope that my points line up. But I've worked really hard up until this point and I really want these to be accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a technique called a hang pin to help get those points as accurate as possible. Now, in piecing this, the bottom of these are straight of grain and these are bias. So I want to make sure I'm putting my bias on my top to avoid stretching as much as possible. And now this is the side that I'm going to pin. Now I could just simply put some pins, but I'm not guaranteed in my accuracy. And a hang pin gives you a much greater chance of having super accurate points. So here's how it goes. Going to take a pin and place it in right here, right at the point of where my piece comes. So on this side, this is what it looks like. And then I'm going to go in right here, the same point, go all the way through to the other side. And I'm going to flatten my two pieces together, and I'm going to let that pin hang there, hence the name hang pin. And I want to make sure that it's not tilted this way or tilted this way, and that it stays completely perpendicular to this, because that way my points are going to be exactly on top of each other. And what I want to do now is take 2 additional pins and place one on either side of the hang pin. I'll need to remove the hang pin before I head to the machine, as I can't sew with a pin hanging out like that. But now that I have these in, I can safely remove this one and know that that point is lined up perfectly with the one on the other side. So I'm going to repeat that process right here. So again, going to start by taking my pin, placing it right at the top there, and then I'm going to place it right at the top of this one. And what this does is it ensures that even if you don't have a perfect 1/4 of an inch here, if one is more scant than the other, that your points are lined up on top of each other, which that is the important part when going to sew this, is that the points are lined up. So again, perpendicular, grab 2 more pins, place one on either side, then pull out that hang pin. And I'm going to repeat with both of these. Now that I have pinned every intersection, I'm going to head on over to the machine to sew this seam. I'm set up to my scant 1/4 inch seam, and I am going to backstitch at the beginning and the end, since this row is not going to have an additional border on it. Now, previously when I've taught the hang pin, it's generally to attach entire complete rows of blocks, and the distance from one hang pin to another can often be 12 inches or more. In those cases, I'll often suggest sewing about 1 inch at each hang pin, opening your project and checking, adjusting if needed, and then sewing the length of the seam. Since this is just a 20-inch pillow, I'm going to go ahead and sew the entire length. So I'm going to start with a back stitch. I'm going to grab my stiletto, and I'm going to slowly sew, making sure I don't flip anything and that I keep those points on top of each other, removing pins as I go so that I don't sew over them. I want to make sure I'm sewing right where those points come together. Now, even with best practices and best intentions, sometimes bias does stretch. And as you can see, I've got a slight bubble here. Since I want to make sure this point lines up and this point lines up, I'm just simply going to lightly tug my bottom piece. And when I say lightly, I mean 1 finger worth. I'm not using a lot of strength here. I'm just going to lightly tug as I sew along this piece and ease those together. And I'll be able to easily flatten that out with my iron when I finish sewing these rows together. Just double checking to make sure my seam underneath hasn't flipped. I feel like I have a little bit too much bulk there. That's because it has. So I'm simply going to lift my foot up so that I can get that flat. Going nice and slow and checking things It's definitely the way to go when sewing the rows together. And now that I'm at the end, I'm just going to backstitch a little bit. Let's see how my row turned out. All right, my first intersection, that looks pretty good. My next intersection looks pretty good. That one's off by a tiny bit, but not much. I'm still happy with that. And it looks like my last one is off by more than the margin of error that I would like. So I'm going to go ahead and unpick this and redo this one. Looks like it just slid. Even with the hang pin, that can happen sometimes. So I'm just going to grab my seam ripper. And I'm just simply going to take out enough to be able to redo this one without taking all of it out. Remove any loose threads. They're easier to get out now than after I resew the seam. Sometimes they pull out better from the front, sometimes from the back. And just trim where necessary. Now I could go ahead and do another hang pin, but it didn't seem to work that well the first time with this intersection, so something might be going on. So I can do a hang pin again, or I can eyeball it. I'm going to try and eyeball it, and let's see how that turns out. So I'm going to start by sewing onto a scrap. And then I'm going to just take these and line them up on top of each other. So this is the other method. If you don't use the hang pin, I suggest just eyeballing and lining them up until they're right on top of each other. Now I'm just going to sew about a 1/2 inch on either side of that point, and then back onto my scrap. And this way, if I'm still not happy, I don't have to take out a very long piece this time, just a tiny little piece. So let's see. Much better. It's still not perfect. I think if I go a little more generous, it'll look even better, but I'm gonna be happy with that. So I'm gonna start a little bit past where I took out my stitching and just re-sew the rest of this seam. Slow and steady, and if you don't have your stiletto handy, a tiny pair of scissors can work sometimes as well. Now I'm going to head on over to the iron to press this seam. So I now have my first 2 rows together, and I'm going to press the length of this seam. So I'm simply going to go ahead, flip it over to the back. I'm going to begin by finger pressing this open. And now that I have 6 points coming together, things are not naturally going to lay as flat. So now my heat resistant stiletto really is going to come in handy to make sure that everything stays as flat as possible. So I'm simply going to walk along my piece in small sections, opening it up as I go. And again, press down with a little wiggle, no ironing, just pressing. At this point, I often flip it over to the front, and I'll press from the front as well. And you can see my points look great because I took that extra time to make sure they were lined up. So the next step is I'm going to go ahead and take the 3rd row and add the 3rd row. And I can go ahead and either do 3 hang pins and then just pin my edges, or I can just go ahead and eyeball it up, whichever way you find best, and then add the 4th row to finish the pillow top. Now that I have pieced all 4 of my rows together, my big triangles pillow top is done. If you're working with the small triangles pillow top, it is going to be 6 rows. All the directions for both are included in the beginning of the book. The next step is quilting. There's lots of options here. You could do it at home on a domestic machine with a straight line or a stipple, or you could do it on a long arm. With long arm, you have custom or you have pantograph. I sent this one off to Teresa of Quilting is My Bliss, and she did the Soho pantograph pattern. I think it completes it nicely without taking away from the dinosaurs. And you can see that quilting often shrinks your piece. Don't be worried about that. That's very typical. If you would like to quilt this at home on your domestic machine and you're not that experienced in quilting, I would suggest starting off with a straight line design. Using your piecing as a guide, this pillow would be quilted very well doing straight line quilting along either sides. Not in the ditch, but either sides about 1/2 inch away from the line. I'll include a diagram in this week's email. If you haven't signed up for the sew along to get the emails, the link to do that is below. Before we go over the next step of what we do after we've quilted this, I want to show you one more possibility for using scraps to make your pillow. I've been working on a few quilts for my baby niece, and I've been cutting some scraps along the way. I'm not worried about orientation with these. So some of them you can see my rainbows are going all different directions, but I'm cutting these triangles, which are sized to be the small triangles, from my scraps as I go until I have enough to make a small triangles pillow. And I want to show you how I cut my scraps. So I'm going to simply grab a few scraps, and these are leftover pieces from cutting out other things, the edges, all kinds of variety of things. So what I will do, I don't worry about pressing these usually. If they have a significant bend in them, you can go ahead and press them. And what I do is I take either my sidekick or my super sidekick. The super sidekick is the ruler that most of you probably have. The sidekick is just the smaller version. It has 1 through 4 instead of 1 through 8. It can be easier to work with on small things sometimes. So either one will work. And I'll simply take my ruler and place it over the scrap to see if I can fit a triangle on there. In this case, I'm looking for a 3.5 inch triangle. And as long as I can fit it on there, it means my scrap is big enough. So then I'll simply figure out the best way to cut it. So I want, in this one, I'm gonna cut here and then leave that. That might be usable for something else. I'm gonna line up one straight line on my triangle. Cut, toss this back in my scrap pile, and then I'm going to flip this back over to cut the other side. And as you can see, there's not really a dinosaur or anything featured in this print, but this pillow is a great way to use up scraps, and it will match everything else that I've made for the nursery. So another one, let's see, and if I went all the way to here, I don't have enough, but if I slide down, still a little short, but if I slide over, I do have enough. So what I want to do in this case is I want to start my cut, and then I will show you how I rotate it around the ruler to get the rest of it. Or I could base it off of this straight line. So that is a straight line. Don't need to worry about bias when cutting scrap triangles. 2 of your sides at least will be bias and 1 will not. Or you might end up with all 3 bias if you turn it in a weird wonky way. And if you want to, you can cut all 3 of your corners blunt. You might not have the regular corners blunt based off of where you trim it off. Here's how you blunt the corner. Just line your piece back up underneath where you cut. There you go. So now I have another triangle. Another great thing to use as scraps to cut up for this is your backing. So if you've already sent another piece out to be quilted that has similar fabrics, in this case, this was from another one of the quilts, you often have this piece that is a few inches wide near the selvage that the quilter needed to put it onto the long arm. And this is great scrap that can be used to cut up into triangles to make the pillow. So I'm going to continue cutting small triangles out of all of my scraps and work on making some scrap pillows. After quilting your pillow panel, it's time to go ahead and trim it before creating your backing. Now you have two options here. Currently it is a rectangle. You could leave it as is, make your own pillow form and leave it as a rectangle. I designed it to be a square, and that's how I want to finish mine. The directions tell you what size to cut this, but very often things shrink during quilting. So I suggest measuring from the top to the bottom, which is a smaller dimension, to see what size your pillow top currently is. So mine looks like it is 19 3/4 inches. So I'm going to write that down. And now I know that I want to cut 19 3/4 inches apart. Some people have very large rulers to do that. I'm going to show you how I do it with a simple 6x24. Half of 9 3/4 is 9 7/8. So that's what I know my center is. And I know the center of my pillow panel is right here in the middle of these triangles. So what I'm going to do is take my ruler, and since I'm going to use a pencil, but this will end up underneath in the seam allowance anyway, I'm going to go 9 7/8 and line it up on that point. Make sure that I have a line horizontal across my triangles. I'm simply going to mark a line, rotate my piece around, and I'm going to do that again, 9 7/8. And my double check is that now the line I already drew should be on 19 3/4, which it is. I'm going to go ahead and draw the line over here. And now I'm simply going to take my rotary cutter and trim off this excess to create a square pillow top. You can baste ahead of time inside of this if you'd like. Since it's a small project, I don't think anything's going to unravel in the short time till I get the back on, but that is an option. And rotate it around and trim again on my line. And now I have a square pillow top ready for my backing. This is the fabric I have chosen for my backing, and I've gone ahead and cut a piece. I'm working with the large pillow here, so this piece is 14 inches, and right now it's width of fabric, and I want to trim it down so that it's two pieces the same width as this. So now I know that is 19 3/4. So the first thing I'm going to do is trim off my selvages. And this is where a lot of people tend to use the lines on their mat when they have to measure things that are bigger than their ruler. And I find that the lines on the mat are not always incredibly accurate, so I find much more success using a ruler. You can stack two rulers together, or you can go ahead and mark things with a pencil. I know here that I need 19 3/4 again. I'm just simply going to mark it. Line up my ruler, make sure I'm square on the top and the bottom here as well, so that I have two rectangles. And now I'm going to head over to my machine to finish two raw edges. I want to finish, since my fabric is directional and I have a rainbow, I want to make sure that I finish one raw edge at the bottom of the rainbow and one raw edge at the top of the rainbow. If your print is not directional, you don't need to worry about which edges you're finishing. You just want to finish two of the long edges. Back over at my machine, and I could go ahead and turn my iron on to press my 1/4 inch and then my other 1/4 inch, or I can simply just use Wonder Clips. This does not have to be precise. If you do slightly more generous than a 1/4 inch, that is a-okay here, since this will just be our pillow panel in the back. So I'm simply just going to fold over my 1/4 inch and then another 1/4 inch and use my Wonder Clips to hold it in place. And now I'm going to go ahead and top stitch this. I'm going to stitch from this side to make sure that I catch the 1/4 inch. I have thread in my machine that matches this fabric. So in this case, I have white in my bobbin and as my top thread. And I'm going to do a little bit of back stitching. Now this one I top stitched the top of the rainbow, so this piece I'm going to top stitch the bottom of the rainbow, and I'm just going to repeat the same steps. Now that I have my pieces top stitched, it's time to go ahead and add them to my pillow panel. I'm going to start with my pillow panel and make sure if it's directional that everything is in the right direction. And I'm going to start with my top piece. So in this case, that is the piece that I did the top stitching on the bottom of the rainbows, and I'm going to place that right sides together, and I'm going to align all the raw edges along here, along the top, and along the left. And then I'm going to place the other piece where my rainbow is top stitched at the top and place that on the bottom. Again, aligning the raw edges here, along the bottom, and along the left. I'm going to go ahead and put wonder clips all around and sew my 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to stop a 1/4 inch from the corner, turn, continue sewing all the way around. One final tip that I do find very helpful is to reinforce the corner before trimming off the excess. Simply going to do that by just going back and forth a couple times. And then I'm simply going to cut off the excess bulk. I've now completed sewing the panels onto my pillow, and it's time to turn it right side out and put in a pillow form. So simply going to just flip it and gently push out the corners. You could use a tool if you really want crisp corners, but I find pushing with your finger is generally enough. And do that for all 4 corners. Let's flip the other back piece. And again, I'm just pushing with my finger. If I did want to use a tool, my heat resistant stiletto works very well. Either the heat resistant end or the stiletto end works very well for turning as well. And so now that I have those, some people prefer to press at this point to create a nice crisp edge. I don't find that necessary, especially without binding. I like the gentle curve that you get. So now I'm going to take a pillow form. And you can find these at quilt shops as well as many other stores and online. This is a 20-inch pillow form for the large triangles pillow. If you don't have access to a pillow form, you can simply make one yourself. Use muslin, sew 2 squares together and stuff it. The advantage of using a pillow form is that I can take this off and wash it when necessary. So now I'm just going to take my pillow form and I'm going to stick it in the top part first. And push those upper 2 corners in. So this is what it looks like now. And then I'm just going to pull this back piece over and tuck in the other 2 corners. And sometimes you need to give it a little bit of fluffing and zhuzhing till you get it exactly right. And there we go. We have one beautiful, fantastic finished pillow. And looks nice on the back and the front, and easily can be removed when needed for cleaning. So thanks so much for joining me here today. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it, subscribe, and leave your comments with us. You can also turn on notifications to receive an alert when I have a new video. We are looking forward to seeing your triangle pillows. Please post those on social media using the hashtag #JaybirdsBaby. And I will be back here next week to guide you through making the Cuddles Quilt. See you soon.